In 1957, a film about obsession was made by men who were themselves dangerously obsessed. David Lean spent 14 months in Ceylon's jungles constructing what would become one of cinema's greatest achievements. But the cost was staggering. The actors threatened to quit. A director insulted his star within minutes of meeting him. Two writers hid their identities like Cold War spies. A train crashed while the Prime Minister watched in horror. And when the dust settled, a man who couldn't read English walked away with an Oscar for a screenplay he never wrote. The Bridge on the River Kwai won 7 Academy Awards, but behind the triumph was chaos so complete, it's a miracle the film exists at all. Here are 15 bizarre facts about the Bridge on the River Kwai that history left out. Fact 1. The Oscar winner couldn't speak English. One of the strangest moments in Academy Award history occurred in 1958, when Pierre Boulle won Best Adapted Screenplay for The Bridge on the River Kwai. What made this bizarre wasn't just that Boulle didn't attend, it's that he had nothing to do with writing it and couldn't read a word of English. Boulle was a French novelist who wrote the original book. His involvement ended there. The actual screenplay came from Carl Foreman and Michael Wilson, talented writers behind High Noon and A Place in the Sun. But both were on the Hollywood blacklist, banned from official credit due to suspected communist sympathies. The studio needed a name for the screenplay. They chose Boulle simply because he wrote the novel, even though he'd never seen a script draft. Producer Sam Spiegel accepted the Oscar on Boulle's behalf while the real writers watched from the shadows. The Academy didn't correct this injustice until 1984, nearly 30 years later. Fact 2. 2 blacklisted writers worked in secret. The screenplay's creation reads like a spy thriller. Carl Foreman and Michael Wilson were accomplished writers whose names had become toxic during McCarthy-era witch hunts. When Sam Spiegel hired them, both had to operate like underground agents. Foreman worked on the initial draft in London, communicating through intermediaries. When David Lean rejected his version, Spiegel secretly flew Wilson to Ceylon, where he posed as a tourist while spending months rewriting the script in hidden hotel rooms. Neither writer could visit the set or meet actors. Their pages were delivered anonymously. Discovery would have meant boycotts, congressional investigations, and financial ruin for everyone involved. They watched their carefully crafted dialogue spoken by Alec Guinness and William Holden, knowing they could never receive public recognition. The Academy finally awarded posthumous Oscars to both in 1984, 3 decades too late. Fact 3. The train explosion failed spectacularly. March 10, 1957 was supposed to be the production's crowning moment. The bridge explosion would be filmed before distinguished guests, including Ceylon's Prime Minister. Multiple cameras were positioned to capture every angle of a sequence that could never be repeated. Then everything went wrong. Cameraman Freddie Ford found himself unable to clear the blast zone in time. As charges detonated, Lean faced an impossible choice: save his crewmen or save his shot. He stopped filming mid-explosion. The train, already in motion, crashed directly into a generator, wrecking the locomotive while the Prime Minister watched in stunned silence. The crew scrambled overnight to repair everything. The following morning, with the Prime Minister graciously returning, the sequence was successfully filmed. But those agonizing hours became legendary as one of Hollywood's most stressful nights. Fact 4. A 68-year-old silent star made his comeback. When Sessue Hayakawa walked onto set in 1956, most young crew members had no idea they were working with one of cinema's first superstars. He was 68 and had been forgotten by Hollywood for decades. In the 1910s, Hayakawa had been a phenomenon, earning $5,000 weekly when Chaplin was still a newcomer, Hollywood's first Asian leading man, and one of its first. Then the sound arrived. His heavy accent made dialogue difficult, and rising anti-Asian sentiment further limited opportunities. David Lean saw something others missed: quiet dignity and fierce pride that decades of disappointment hadn't extinguished. Hayakawa brought all of it to Colonel Saito, creating a villain who was somehow sympathetic, a man trapped by honor, just like Colonel Nicholson. His performance earned an Academy Award nomination. Hayakawa later called it the highlight of his entire career. career. He'd waited 40 years for redemption. Fact 5. The film almost died over missing women. 3 weeks into filming, Columbia Pictures head Harry Cohn was ready to shut down everything. He'd discovered a fatal flaw. No white women anywhere in the story. No romance. Nothing that 1950s audiences supposedly required. David Lean was furious. The story took place in a jungle prison camp where women would be historically impossible and dramatically absurd. But Cohn controlled the money. Lean surrendered. He added a sequence with William Holden's character having a hospital romance with a nurse. The scene was shot after all other filming was completed. Lean called it a very terrible scene, representing everything he despised about Hollywood interference. Every time he watched the finished film, that sequence reminded him of the battle he'd lost. Fact 6. Alec Guinness almost quit on day 1. When Alec Guinness arrived in Ceylon, David Lean delivered possibly the worst greeting in Hollywood history. Standing on the tarmac, Lean said flatly, "I wanted Charles Lawton, you know." Guinness later wrote that he considered turning around and paying his own fare home. He'd already felt uncertain about the dramatic role, so different from his beloved comedies. Lean's comment was the final straw. The two men clashed constantly throughout filming, with Lean demanding a humorless Colonel Nicholson, while Guinness fought to inject humanity. Their arguments grew so heated that Spiegel had to intervene repeatedly. Charles Lawton had actually been forced to withdraw when insurance companies refused to cover his poor health. Guinness was the only viable option, yet Lean chose to wound him anyway. Despite their toxic relationship, Guinness won the Academy Award for Best Actor. He and Lean never worked together again. Fact 7. The bridge cost more than entire films. The wooden bridge was one of the most expensive props ever built, costing $52,000, equivalent to over $500,000 today. Many complete Hollywood films of the era cost less than what Lean spent on a single structure that would exist for minutes before being destroyed. The bridge stretched 425 feet across the Kalani River, rising 90 feet above water. Construction required months of work by local crews assisted by elephants transporting heavy beams through jungle terrain. Producer Sam Spiegel reportedly inflated costs when speaking to journalists, sometimes claiming $250,000. Production designer Donald Ashton later admitted these figures were exaggerated. But even the actual cost represented an extraordinary commitment to a single scene. The bridge could never be rebuilt. It would exist once, be filmed once, and vanish forever. Fact 8. William Holden got the deal of the century. William Holden walked away with more money than any actor had ever earned from a single film. His contract guaranteed $300,000 up front, plus 10% of gross profits. Spiegel had resisted casting Holden, preferring cheaper actors. Lean insisted the film needed a major American star. Holden, fresh off his Oscar for Stalag 17, had leverage to demand almost anything. The Bridge on the River Kwai became 1957's highest-grossing film, earning over $30 million worldwide. Holden's share translated to more than $3 million, making him the world's highest-paid actor. David Lean, who created this masterpiece through 14 months of grueling work, received $150,000 total, less than half Holden's upfront salary, a fraction of what the actor earned. Fact 9. The wrong river got famous. The River Kwai in the title doesn't exist where the story claims. The real Kwai was a small stream near Burma, too insignificant for any bridge. The actual Death Railway Bridge was built over the Mae Klong River near Kanchanaburi, Thailand, 200 miles away. When Lean's film became an international phenomenon, tourists arrived in Thailand demanding to see the River Kwai. They found the bridge but no river by that name. In 1960, Thai officials made a practical decision. They renamed the Mae Klong River as the Kwai Yai, close enough to Kwai that tourists could find what they wanted. Hollywood had rewritten geography. A river that existed for centuries under one name was rechristened to match a novelist's invention. Fact 10. The composer had 10 days for 45 minutes. Malcolm Arnold called The Bridge on the River Kwai the worst job of his career, not because of the film's quality, but because he had only 10 days to write 45 minutes of orchestral music. Most composers receive months. Arnold had less than 2 weeks to create, orchestrate, and record a complete score for what everyone knew would be a landmark film. He worked around the clock, composing during the day and orchestrating through the night, with no time for revision. Every piece had to be right on the first attempt. The awards that followed seemed almost insulting, recognition for work that had nearly destroyed him. Arnold accepted them graciously, but privately maintained the score could have been far better with adequate time. Fact Fact 11. The whistling hid vulgar lyrics. The iconic whistling scene exists because actual lyrics were too obscene for 1950s cinema. Real British soldiers had created vulgar alternatives to the Colonel Bogey March, mocking Hitler and Nazi leaders with anatomically explicit words. Lean wanted historical accuracy. Studio censors rejected this immediately. The lyrics were impossible to broadcast. The whistling solution was elegant. By having actors whistle instead of sing, Lean preserved the defiant spirit while avoiding explicit content. Audiences understood instinctively that these men were doing something rebellious. The scene became one of cinema's most memorable moments, that haunting whistle echoing through jungle mist. Most people today have no idea vulgar lyrics ever existed. Lean had transformed censorship into artistry. Fact 12. Ghosting effects plagued the film. Throughout filming, mysterious technical problems created visual defects that proved nearly impossible to correct. Faulty camera equipment and poorly manufactured optical components caused persistent anomalies. The most troubling was a ghosting effect appearing unpredictably, creating faint double exposures that made certain shots appear blurred. Additionally, a ticking motion caused images to jump sideways at random intervals. These problems were unique to this production, likely from equipment damage during the long journey or degradation from tropical humidity. Many defects couldn't be fixed during principal photography. When the film was later transferred to high definition, these vintage flaws became more apparent than they'd been in original theatrical prints. Fact 13. Local villagers became British POWs. Rather than shipping expensive British extras to Ceylon, Lean hired local Sinhalese villagers and transformed them into European prisoners of war, reversing Hollywood's typical racial casting practices. 1950s Hollywood routinely used white actors to portray other ethnicities. The bridge on the River Kwai went opposite, using Asian performers for European characters through careful costuming and makeup. The transformation was challenging, making Sinhalese extras appear as malnourished British soldiers, training them to move like exhausted men from an entirely different culture. The results were remarkably effective. In crowd scenes, local villagers are indistinguishable from professional actors, creating an authentic atmosphere that would have been financially impossible through traditional casting. Fact 14. The film's footage nearly vanished. After filming the climactic explosion, irreplaceable footage disappeared during shipping, triggering a frantic worldwide search. The Suez Canal crisis had disrupted maritime routes, so the production chose air freight. The shipment never arrived in London. Panic spread. The missing footage contained the entire climactic sequence, everything months of preparation had built toward. Producer Spiegel launched an international search, contacting airlines and government agencies across multiple countries. Days passed without a word. The possibility of completing the film without its essential finale seemed increasingly real. Eventually, miraculously, the footage was located. But those agonizing days left permanent scars, a reminder of how easily cinematic history can be lost to logistical failure. Fact 15. Elephants took Union-style breaks. The elephants hired to help build the bridge operated on their own inflexible schedule, taking mandatory breaks every 4 hours regardless of production needs. When break time arrived, they simply stopped working and walked to the river. No amount of pressure could convince them to extend shifts. Handlers explained these rest periods were biologically necessary. Elephants would overheat and potentially die if forced to work continuously. The entire filming schedule was reorganized around elephant breaks. Donald Ashton learned to plan construction in 4-hour segments, ensuring elephant-dependent tasks could be completed before the animal's internal clocks signaled rest. Hollywood had met a force more stubborn than any studio executive. For once, Hollywood lost. The bridge on the River Kwai endures because it understands something essential about human nature. Our greatest strengths and most dangerous flaws are often the same quality viewed from different angles. Colonel Nicholson's discipline becomes madness. David Lean's perfectionism nearly destroyed his production while creating a masterpiece. Behind every frame of this film lies a story of compromise, conflict, and chaos that mirrors the psychological battles on screen. Blacklisted writers working in shadows, a star greeted with insults, a river renamed to match fiction, elephants who refused to negotiate. The bridge they built in Ceylon was destroyed for the cameras. But the one they built in cinema history still stands, carrying us across the river between brilliance and obsession, where the line disappears entirely.